Give me an example of one of the, what you call a great dive that you remember from that era.
So for spring vacation, they threw us out of the dorms. So I had to go over to Newport and stay in the dormitories over there because I had nowhere else to go. I couldn't afford to fly back to Michigan. So my buddy Jim McGinnis bought me a little red wagon and dropped me off with another guy, and we went trundling down to the beach, and Bill Herder, Deep Sea Bill's, had a dive store right there on the jetty, the South Jetty. So I gave him a deposit for money so that I didn't have to carry cash. You know, we could fill our tanks, and we'd pass by a store, get air, go out on the jetty, and we'd go diving. And like you were saying, different times, I wrote in my dive log, we had 15-foot visibility, it's the best in the world. And we got to dive all around the different fingers of the South Jetty. Then we'd trundle on back and repeat the process the next day. And then Jim came late in the week to pick us up, to cart all our stuff back to campus because he had other things to do. And so he was a great friend as well.
That's great. And so you spent the West Coast diving started in Oregon, and
Yep.
And then how soon did you make it to Seattle area?
The very first spring that I was at Oregon State, another NWDHA instructor, Ron Corkum, came up to deal with Bill High's quarterly NWDHA updates that they had. So we drove all the way up to Montlake to attend one of the workshops that Bill had. And
Do you remember what year that was?
that would have been the spring of '74.
Okay.
And then after the event, I wasn't the only one in this van. There were two students, and so he wanted to take us down and throw us in saltwater to do their checkout dives. So we went and did their open water dives at the oil dock in Edmonds, and then at the underwater park at Edmonds. And I said, I really like this. This is great fun. There's a lot more to see than the few anemones and few small fish. You know, it's great seeing a real lingcod and an octopus. So that was great fun.
And usually the visibility was a little better up this way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was warmer.
And oh yeah, that's good. That's right. It is like colder in those Oregon waters for
You
some
got
reason.
it. Yes, for some reason.
Yeah, you got to go farther north to get warm.
You got it, exactly.
All right. So when did you actually move to this area?
I moved up to Seattle August of 1976.
1976. All right then. So I know you've been extremely instrumental in the development and the creation of the Edmonds Underwater Park. Tell me how you got started, you know, as one of the leaders in that development.
Well, it's a funny collection of people that I ended up making the connection with the underwater park. So when I moved to Seattle, I was teaching at Shoreline Community College. So I latched onto another mentor, Bill High. He was running their Scuba program. And one of the students was going to and from the Edmonds waterfront to go diving. And I was down there one day trying to figure out how to get a dive together. And I ran into an old college friend from the University of Michigan who is now working on his PhD on artificial reefs. And Jim Walton was putting out a tire reef off of the Edmonds waterfront in preparation for their fishing pier. So I said, well, geez, you know, is there a way I can pitch in? He says, oh, I remember you. Yeah, come on. So I helped out on putting out the tire reef. And then at the conclusion of putting that out, the state put together a plan about, well, what are we going to do for mitigation? Because the tire reef is going to be off limits for divers. We're going to have to improve the underwater park. So Spence Campbell was part of the team that had a fact-finding mission about what divers would like to have at Edmonds. So I attended that meeting, and I said, this is great. You know, they're really going to try to do something here, not just have dirt everywhere. And so I attended that meeting, got in touch with Ray Buckley from the Department of Fisheries at the time, and Mary Lou Mills to learn more about how I could maybe help out with their planning process. Well, lo and behold, they needed somebody to do some legwork. So, young kid, not a lot, unattached, lots of free time. So I started making drawings of, here's what the park looks like now. Here's what the park's going to look like. And then here's what we might want to design in. So this is plan A, plan B. So they were going to spend some money to do things, and I started doing the drawings.
And what year was that?
That was the end of 1976 into 1977.
So that's when the real planning and development of the Edmonds Underwater Park began.
Yeah, they'd already established the park in 1970, but it was way too small. It's not the size of the park of today. It was only 250 feet wide, so it barely made it to what we now call the Lion Way, and to Enhancement Way. The first trail right next to the dry dock is the Lion Way. And so it was very narrow, and the state needed more room. So they were coordinating with the city to expand the park all the way up to Casper Street and bumping it from the very few acres up to 27 acres. So I was doing all those drawings, and those were going in for the permitting. And then fall of 1977, there were 2 fatalities in the park, and the park had a bad reputation.
I remember those.
And those were because there were, I think it was 1976, there were actually 6 fatalities in the park. And a lot of it had to do with people not understanding how far offshore things were, getting caught in the current, weather, current, tides, all kinds of things. So the city in fall of 1977 closed the park because there were so many fatalities. But Bill High and Spence Campbell and another group got together with the city to form a safety committee. And again, young kid, plenty of time, assigned him to do some chores. So they had me part of the committee, and so I listened to all the suggestions and made up lists and came up with diagrams and plans of what we might do. And so the result of that was that Bill High arranged through the Man in the Sea Symposium for matching money to put out some rest floats. State Fish and Wildlife had a plan of a rest float for divers, but they didn't have the money to build it. Bill arranged the money, the city came up with the people, and then they built it, and then it just sat because nobody knew how to install it. So I raised my hand and I said, well, I don't know how to install it, but it's not saving anybody on the beach, so let's go put them out and we'll just take care of them. So I wrote a letter to the city summer of 1978 saying, I'll help maintain these for 5 years. And we received some buoys from NOAA, so we put those around the perimeter of the park. And so that's how I got my feet wet and got everything started. So.
And you've been working with that park ever since?
Yep. It wasn't initially all the time. It started out slowly because there's a lot of concern about dealing with volunteers. And are they really going to do what they say they're going to do? And who's going to be on the hook and all that? So, eventually the big turning point was in 1982. DIT offered the city one of their vessels. It was called the Fossil. If you look close, it was really the Foss 16, and they painted out part of the 6 to make it an L, so it became the Fossil, and it had been built back in the 1880s, and as the Olympia.
It was a fossil then.
It was a fossil. It was in bad shape, and so they contacted me about placing it. So that was the first time that the dialogue started to be not just us asking for things, but they wanted our help in doing some stuff. So it turns out that fall, I arranged with my teammate from the Chicago ICC. He was hubbed now out of Port Townsend. So
and he what's his name?
That was Bill Stewart.
Okay.
So Stewie came over to help me out with how to deal with anchoring this boat, and he was a commercial diver. He knew all about this. And that summer, or that spring, I'd just become an instructor. So I was newly minted, and I knew that, I don't want to get it over my head, so call for help. And so Bill Stewart came and showed me what to do, and we placed the anchors and got everything ready. DIT delivered the boat, and they weren't trying to pull a fast one on the city, but the city didn't understand the condition of the boat, and it sank that night. And so there's all this incrimination that the divers just sunk the boat and all that.
So you had a secret boat sinking party, huh?
Yeah, the plank had popped loose and it had flooded, and no divers were anywhere near it at the time. And the city had no trespassing signs all over it. It was really pretty cute underwater. That, you know, not allowed to trespass. Okay.
How long was the boat? How big?
The fossil was just over 70 feet and had been nicely prepared for divers. It had a big hatch into the where the engine had been, and then it had another entryway so that you could get into the lounge area. And so it was very safe for divers, but it wasn't exactly where we wanted it, and it wasn't ballasted to stay on the bottom. So every storm, it kept creeping towards the beach. It jumped over the anchors that we had, and we're starting to run towards the beach. So we had a lot of work that winter to load the boat with the ballast that we had planned on putting in via boat. Now we're dragging it offshore and pitching it in, you know, the hard way, the more labor-intensive way.
And DIT was glad to see the boat go.
They had a problem because of the leasing of where they were mooring the boat. So they're very cooperative. They delivered it for free, and you know, they were trying to do the best that they could. And but I think the city didn't understand how fragile the boat was, and I don't think DIT truly understood that, because they hadn't taken it out in the Sound in years. They'd been using it in Lake Washington and in Lake Union. So.
You know, I've always wanted to be part of a boat sinking party.
Yeah.
But you actually pulled it off.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great accomplishment. So what other kinds of things were sunk and installed in the park over the years?
So the way things worked, it turns out that the city was planning on keeping the boat on the surface for the 5 or 6 months that it was going to take for all the permits to clear. So they gave me a whole bunch of rope to moor the boat to keep it on site. And they'd received these donations from Foss Tug. So they were mooring lines, and they were 100-foot long, 200-foot long lines. They all ended up in my front yard. Well, my poor wife said, enough of this. You got to figure out what to do with it. So Vaughn Furkey and I hatched the plan based on a talk that Spence Campbell gave. Spence Campbell had made dives at Cobb Seamount and had laid out a trail system for his divers to find their way around the top.
Yeah, the chain highways.
The chain highways. So
yes.
I said, well, we'll try that. We'll go make some trails underwater. So Vaughn found a building where the park and ride is in Kenmore that they were knocking down. It was a cinder block building. So we got a whole bunch of used cinder blocks, and we took them out and placed them in a row and ran the rope through them. So we ended up with our first trail. And at the time, we were joking, we'll call it the South Subway. You know, it's a subway.
That's right, it is a subway.
And then we added another rope trail system a couple months later to connect to the new tugboat that we just sank. So those were the first things that we did. Then we ended up with a wooden sailboat that was made out of cedar. We sank that, and then NOAA was very kind to give us some shelving, industrial shelving, that somebody with a backhoe or a forklift had gone crazy and backed into. So it's all twisted, so they couldn't use it anymore. But the fish weren't going to care that everything was kind of crooked. So we took that out, and we did it our typical way. We loaded the boat with the cargo, went out and scuttled the boat. Then we unloaded the boat as time was available, and we assembled a jungle gym underwater. So that was another one of our first features.